Hey guys, how's it going? On today's video, we're going to be going over my custom digital cluster for my BMW E30. We have Prosport gauges with a Mako Motorsport backing. I did it so it mimicked a stock gauge cluster. The Mako Motorsport's backing, you can have it laid out as custom as you want it. They can do it for you. And it's supposed to bolt up just like the factory cluster is with the tabs and the holes for the screws. So I have the fuel gauge, a Speedo, tack, water pump. I have the warning light from the check panel, or like the check engine light. I have high beams, and I have the 2 turn signals. And then I also have down here in my Garagistic gauge pod holder, I have the voltmeter and I have oil pressure. The 2 in the center, you can change the colors between red, green, white, and blue. And then on the 2 on the edges are only red and blue, and same with the gauges down on my center console. So all the sensors are supplied from Prosport, and they come with the gauges. The only thing that's not included is a GPS module, which you have to buy on itself. So I did the GPS module because I could not get the signal coming from the ECU to work with the Prosport gauges. So the GPS module plugs right in and makes life a ton easier without having to do any extra wiring. So this is probably gonna be a 2-part video. This part will go over all the wiring and how I wired it to make it work. Everything works except for the fuel gauge. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but I think it's having a trouble reading both level sensors from the left and right tank because I have a late model tank. There's 2 level sensors that go to 1. So that's not reading properly. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. The tack at idle is 100 off, but after that it's perfect. The Speedo with the GPS sensor is fine, and so is the thermostat. Getting the tack to work, I had to also get this Dakota Digital SG I100BT unit, which is like a signal interface, because the tack coming from the Prosport gauge didn't like the signal that came off the ECU from the E30. So I have it wired in, and you can go through and adjust settings or whatnot. I also try to use the speed this to use for the diff as well. It didn't seem to work, but it did work for the tack. There's still more adjusting that needs to be done, but it does work. I know it looks like an absolute mess with all the wiring everywhere and not having the dash in, but each Prosport gauge has its own harness that it comes with. So you have 3 or 4 or 5 wires that go to each gauge, and it comes with its own loom that you can then splice into your original harness. What I did for wiring, I wouldn't say is correct, but it does work. There are definitely better ways of doing the wiring. So I say use this video as a guide and less of following exactly how I did it. There's definitely better ways to run power and for ground, and linking all of the products together with less wiring than I currently did. Also, I will include a ton of links down in the description to articles and forums that I've read to help me through the process. So let's get started. We're going to start with the water temp, and then we'll move across. I just want to reiterate again to use this as a guide, then actually following how I did the wiring. I kind of just took power from places and spliced in to make stuff work. So there's definitely a better way to do it, but this is just the overview on what wires you need for the signal and to make the gauges work. So starting with the water temp gauge, this is the pigtail that is supplied. You have I don't know why it's not focusing, there we go. You have a white, a red, a black, an orange, and a green. So depending on what color you want the gauge, either blue or red, you could also use it for a signal. So let's say you have an aftermarket ECU, and if it gets too hot, you can use it to change the color of the tack or of the water temp as like a signal wire, so it changes from, let's say, blue when it's good to red when it's hot, so you know there's an issue. So depending on how you wire it will be how the colors go. So I have the orange and the white running to power, which makes it red all the time, and I have the red tucked in here. Sometimes the way they actually put this together, the wires are actually swapped. I don't know if that's something that happens from the factory on purpose, but the instructions say one thing and the wires are actually different. So in my case, the water temp sensor, or the water temp pigtail, power is actually orange, and then the white represents the red color I wanted. The green is the signal wire. I don't know why it won't go. So the signal wire, which will go through your firewall all the way to your gauge that they supply, that I have in the thermostat housing. I'll take a picture and insert that right here. And then black, simple, black is ground. So I didn't steal any wires from the instrument cluster to make the water temp work. I did that all from what is included in the kit. So you have your gauge, the pigtail, and the temp sensor, which is in the block. So this plugs in, and there you go. That is your wiring for your water temp gauge. Alright, let's move on to the fuel gauge wiring. This is how I wired it in. It is not working properly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So this is what I have. We have black going to the ground. The red and orange is going to be your power and color wire for it to be all red. Green is your signal, and white is you would choose this as another color. I was trying to set it so that when the fuel got low, it would signal a color change, so it would go from always red to blue when it was low, to show low fuel. But I haven't really gotten that working. But I do have, so you have your blacks going to the ground, your red and orange is going to power. I have the green going to this green and brown wire or the white cluster pigtail. And then when I was trying to wire in the white wire, I had that spliced into this brown and purple, brown and really light blue wire right here, also on this gauge. That I don't have working, but that is how I did wire it in. So that is the fuel pump wiring. So now let's move on to the Speedo wiring. This one's pretty simple. This uses the power and ground for both the speedometer and the tach, as there is a jumper on the cluster, which I'll show shortly. Okay, so we have black as a ground. So then we have the orange and white going to a switched 12-volt source, so that when the key is turned on, power goes to it. And then we have the red wire just coming over to the blue plug on the back of the cluster and is going into a green and red wire, which is an always on 12-volt source. And then I will pull the cluster here. So here's the back of the cluster. As you can see, we have a jumper wire which is included going from this pod to this pod, so that takes care of all of the power and ground for it. So this plugs in to the Speedo, which is right here. And then we also have a signal wire coming off from each of these. The Speedo wire would be going to the Dakota Digital interface, but because it didn't seem to like the signal coming from the ECU no matter what, even with the interface, I just used the GPS sensor from Prosport, which seems to work great. But for the tach, the Dakota Digital interface did seem to work perfectly fine. So I have one wire going from here to the interface, and then from the interface, move this out of the way. So for the tach, for the normal wire, I have it going to this brown and red wire on the white plug going in the back of the cluster, and then as a to the input for the tach, I have it going to this all solid black wire on the blue plug to the back of the cluster, and that's how I have the tach working. Now going over the blinkers. for the right blinker, I have a ground that's just going straight to the port back here, and then I'm using the blue and black wire coming off the blue connector, and that's just simply with the bulbs that Mako provides. It's just a power and ground. Everything else is taken care of in the harness with it blinking. I did add some hot glue just so that they seem to move a little bit even when tightened. So I just added some hot glue, hopefully to restrict them from moving. So that was the right turn, and now for the left turn, if I can find it. And then for the left turn, again, I have just a ground going to the chassis, and then I have that other wire going to, let's see, a blue and red wire on the white plug. So that was the left and right blinkers. Now for the high beam, I have the power and ground going to, actually not going to that, I have it just in the blue plug. So we have one going to a white and purple wire, and then the other one is just going to the solid brown, so that would be your ground right there. And then lastly, we have the check engine light, which is going to be right here. Again, I don't have a ground going there, so I have it going to this again on the blue plug. We have a green and white wire and a black and white wire, and those are going to the flashing on the check engine. Well, that last clip got cut a little short, but that is the end of the wiring for the cluster. Again, please use this as a guide and do not follow exactly how I wired everything. There's definitely better ways to route power to each of the gauges and to and all the grounds, so you don't have a million ground wires going through here. But that is how to wire in your gauges to make them work, or at least how I got mine to work. All the links to the websites I use to figure this all out are also down below. So if you have any questions, please put them down in the comments. I will have a part 2 to this video. I will probably be redoing all the wiring. That's for something else, which you'll see shortly. But everything works for now. I'll put in as many clips as I can right now of it. But again, I did most of this wiring so that I could revert back to a stock cluster if needed. And I could also put them side to side to make sure everything was working how it should be. So yeah, but thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Don't forget to follow me on Instagram at @TheMassDriver. A ton more content coming, and also a new project. So stay tuned for that, and have a great day.